Hello there, I'm Leo Walter for Kit Guru, and this enormous PC case is the Thermaltake Core X71. It's so tall that you're going to get a weird perspective on it, for which I can only apologise. Before I kick off with this review, could I just say, we've had various reader comments in the past about Thermaltake reviews, and I get the impression that certain readers and viewers haven't actually watched the videos through or read the review on the Kit Guru webpage, but they decided to comment anyway. If I might just suggest, to save our poor media wrangler Carl a hard time, if you read the review or watch the video through and then make a comment, that's lovely, feel free. Thumbs up, thumbs down, as you see fit. But very often I think you'll find actually the comments that that you make have actually already been answered in the review. Anywho, onward. So, Thermaltake Core X71, it looks at first glance like a server case, but in actual fact it's not. It's not even eATX, which you might expect, or XLATX. It's a regular ATX tower. But it is huge. Now, I'm quite certain you could actually put an eATX motherboard in this case, but if you did that, you'd probably block off some cable pass-through holes and such like. They describe it as ATX. ATX it is. Very tall. If it was a server case, you'd also expect to have a whole heap of drive bays. In actual fact, it doesn't in particular. It has 5, which is plenty for a PC, so we're not, despite the appearance, talking server. Anyway, the build, as I've done it here, is Gigabyte Z71 XP SLI motherboard with a Skylake Core i7-6700K processor, Corsair LPX DDR4 memory, Seasonic power supply in the base, down this pedestal, which is a platinum fanless 520 watt, and there's a SanDisk SSD running, as it happens, Windows 10. The liquid cooler, and I'm going to talk about cooling quite a bit. It's a Thermaltake Water 3.0 Ultimate cooler, which is a 360mm all-in-one. It's in the roof of the case. This is significant because this case, to my mind, has actually been developed for custom loop cooling, and yet I have chickened out and have gone with an all-in-one. And in a way, it doesn't actually please me because I had intended to go down the custom loop route, but I didn't. Anyway, that's what the system looks like running. Oh, by the way, the graphics card is a reference GTX 980. There we go. So let's just give you a look inside at the innards and obviously photos on Kit Guru as per usual. Now, you may be able to see at the front of the case we have two 140mm ring RIING fans which come with the Thermaltake. They are stock fans, LED. In fact, let me just pull off the front panel just to liberate them. There we go. It just simply pulls off, and on the inside face we have a dust filter. So easy access to that. And there are the ring fans. In the rear of the case we have a regular 140 non-LED fan. Let me just turn off the power so I can move the thing around without electrocuting myself. So it's an ATX tower with a pedestal. Now, you might think at first glance that it has a certain similarity. Well, there's two routes you can take with this. You can either take the route, which is that it's like the Thermaltake Suppressor F51 case I previously reviewed on a pedestal, and that's not entirely wrong. Or if you're going down a different route, you could see signs of something like a Case Labs Merlin SM8, which is a hugely expensive $450 high-end case, and then the pedestal for that will cost you $190. In other words, that whole setup's about 4 times the Core X71. I am choosing to see this as the Suppressor F51 with pedestal. Now, why would you want a pedestal on your PC? A very good question and absolutely fundamental to this case. Let me just take off the two side panels on the pedestal. So you've got 2 thumb screws for the main panel, which incidentally, the main panel, which I've already removed, is windowed. Exactly as you'd expect. I just took it off because otherwise it will reflect like Billio. 2 thumb screws for the back panel. And then 2 thumb screws for the other pedestal cover. So nice and straightforward. And we've got air filters on both sides of the pedestal cover as well as on the front panel. There's also an air filter on the power supply intake. Now, that lays the case bare, and it is a fairly basic steel construction. It's quite lightweight, it's relatively flexy once you start taking components out, which explains why the price of this case is, well, partly explains why this case is so cheap, because it's actually slightly priced under £120, which goes back to my, if you buy the Case Lab thing, you're 4 times the money. This is just under 120. Now, considering that suppressor F51's around the £80 territory, this is not massively expensive. The question is, if the pedestal is and the illuminated fans is what makes the difference, what do you want a pedestal for? You can install a number of things in a pedestal, primarily cooling or a power supply. I've installed that Seasonic power supply down here in the pedestal. If you look on the back, you'll see there is one mounting plate there, and then if you look, you can see 4 screws, and in fact this plate comes out. Power supply can instead go, if you choose, in the floor of the main chamber of the case. Clearly, if you put the power supply in here, then the pedestal is empty, in which case you are basically looking at putting a bunch of illuminated fans or a radiator or some such in the pedestal, or some sort of glorified lighting system or something. Otherwise, it is basically pointless. Now, I've put the power supply down the bottom essentially to give it something to do. The cables from the Seasonic reached all the way to the top of the board without any trouble. Thermaltake has supplied an extension cable should your EPS cables not reach the top of your motherboard. That's a good bit of thinking by them. I didn't happen to need them. Also in the accessories you get a couple of inline resistors for the 2-ring fans at the front if you want to slow down the speeds to make them a bit quieter, which again, not a bad idea, it just means you've got more cabling. Now, cooling. This case can accommodate all manner of fans. I mean, essentially you could put fans in the bottom, the sides, the front, the top, and of course you've got a fan at the rear. You could put 8 fans in this case if you chose, without going totally silly. Liquid cooling, you can put a 360 or 480mm radiator at the front, and in the top you can put a 360 or a 280. You could also put a 420 in the front. Basically, any size of radiator that you've ever even considered can go in the front of this case. Here I have a Pacific RL420 from Thermaltake, which is a 420mm radiator. That will fit in there. I have actually installed it when I was trying things out in the front of this case. It goes in. The thing is, if you do it, if you have the unions downwards, which is sort of decent practice to avoid getting airlocks and bubbles where the hoses connect at the top. If you have it down at the bottom, it means that the hoses are having to pass from the pedestal into the main compartment. Now, there are various grommets and such like, but it means that your routing gets a little bit peculiar. Entirely doable. Is it ideal? That is a question. A bigger question for me, however, is if we take, for example, this pump reservoir unit from Thermaltake, which is a Pacific PT40 DT5. It's part and parcel of this box out of sight here, which is a Pacific RL240 liquid cooling kit. That pump reservoir unit basically is going to end up mounted here where the drive tower is. Now the funny thing is that the mounts for that pump reservoir unit, you get one of these on either side, and you also get sort of a couple of clip-on C-clips that go on the back of the main reservoir to support the body of it. When you have these 2 brackets on that pump reservoir, and obviously you don't have to use Thermaltake's own cooling system, you could use any manufacturer's, but when you have this on there, the hole pattern for the 4 holes is actually a rectangle. Now the floor of the main chamber of the case that separates the ATX chamber from the pedestal has a whole load of holes drilled, but it's in a square pattern. In other words, I can easily put the pump reservoir in, and I did, and line up 2 of the holes, but to line up all 4 I actually have to drill 2 more holes through. Now it's quite thin mild steel, that would be no difficulty, but it doesn't seem entirely right to me. You'd think the thing would come pre-drilled for their hardware, and if you then choose to use other manufacturers, you might have to adapt it somehow. So when I was messing around attempting to work out which hardware to use, going down the custom liquid cooling route using, as I say, the RL240 and considering using the Pacific RL420 radiator to give it some wow, I took out the drive tower. Now this drive tower has 3 caddies in it, like thus, and you can take out a couple of screws, the tower comes out, take out 2 more screws, and the sled at the bottom comes out. That's absolutely fine. You may note there is the other screw of the sled, one there, one there. 1 screw is missing. The reason for that is that when I took out the hardware and then built the PC, and I thought, oh no, actually I'm going to have to change one of my plans, and I put the tower back in, everything is slightly distorted. I'm assuming because I put the motherboard in and tightened up the top with the radiator and such like, and maybe the power supply. In other words, as I mentioned before, it is lightweight steel construction, and I would say that building the PC was enough just to slightly move everything, which is not the end of the world, but it's just indicative of how they've gone about keeping the cost to a minimum. That's the reason why that screw's missing. So the liquid cooler, the pump reservoir unit here, basically went up to here, which with this relatively short reference GTX 980 graphics card, there is space for it with the drive tower removed, but I did have to lose the optical drive bays, which isn't the end of the world. They're just screws at the front, out it comes, no problem. But mounting the pump reservoir there really wasn't very satisfactory. Apart from that, I had 2 holes done, I'd have to make 2 more holes. The back support, which would obviously go against this wall of the case, there wasn't really an obvious place to put it. And similarly, if I'd sort of wanted to mount everything in the floor of the case, down the pedestal, that didn't really seem to be ideal either. It didn't seem to kind of work one way or the other. So I chickened out and I went for the all-in-one route, which, as I say, is the Thermaltake's own Water 3.0 Ultimate 360 cooler in the roof of the case. Works absolutely fine. And the upshot is that were I to move one of these ring fans from there to there and put the power supply from the pedestal in the main chamber of the ATX case, I don't need the pedestal. Basically, that suppressor F51 or a similar ATX case will do the job very nicely. The pedestal becomes completely redundant. So what that's saying to me is, if you're intending to whack in a whole load of fans, a load of illumination, some radiators, because the PR pictures from Thermaltake are showing custom loop systems with sort of 2 or 3 radiators, which would be doable, but the fine details of mounting things like pump reservoirs would be, yes, not entirely fun. Anyway, the other side of mounting a whole bunch of fans in this thing, and you, as I say, you could easily put 8 fans in this case if you chose this. On the rear of the case, there's no PWM hub. You're going to have to connect all those fans up somehow. You're going to be buying a PWM hub. Not a major expense. The fact they haven't included it is no shock. As I say, it's a cheap case for what you get, but you're going to have to bung out that bit more money. If you're not buying a PWM hub, why do you want this case in the first place? Bit of a quandary there. So, or conundrum. Other little puzzles about this case. One that caused me some fun is this little bracket here, fixed by a screw on the inside. Undo the screw to release it. Then you feed through the cables of your mouse and keyboard. Then you do the screw back up. This means that with the side panel on, no one can steal your wired mouse and your wired keyboard. If you have a wired keyboard, that's your big concern. Someone might come along and steal. Really? More concerned, surely they're going to shut the thing down and nick your DDR4. It's lost on me. Also, these cable grommets here, or pass-through grommets, one there, one there, one there. As I say, this plate here comes out if you want to put a power supply in the bottom of the main ATX chamber. I do not know what these are for. Logically, they're for passing something out through the back and then in again, unless you're using an external cooler of some sort. I don't know what you want to pass out through there and in through there, or out through there and in. Don't begin to get it. And there was nothing in the sort of information about this case that gave me a hint either. I guess it's giving you options, but it's lost on me. One thing I did particularly like about this case, cable management is actually pretty good. Now, it's also a little bit deceptive because you have 4 large cable grommets here, 4 cable management holes with grommets, but you don't actually really need to use them. And the reason I'm saying that is because if your power supply is in the floor, in the pedestal, and you're feeding cables up, actually the cables are mainly passing through this hole here, which is behind the motherboard tray and separates the pedestal from the main case. Now that, as it happens, has rolled steel edges but is not grommeted. But the cables go through that any trouble and up they go, and then you have plenty of cable tie anchor points. It is not the tidiest PC in the world, but it certainly isn't bad, and mainly that's because the case is so wide. If we just turn it like thus, it is 250mm wide. Now, generally speaking, a slender case, 210, 215mm, 220, 230 is average, 250 is wide. On such a tall case, 250 doesn't actually look very large. But what it means is you can just bung the stuff in and it just goes. For example, that SATA power connector is sitting on the SSD. You can still put the panel on, it's no problem. Plenty of other cases that just doesn't happen. Drive bays. The 3 drive bays in the towers are straightforward. These two here less so. They're sort of 2.5, 3.5 sort of drive sleds. They clip in place, but the clips that hold them are just bits of bent steel which are part of the case itself. You have to kind of bend against them to lift the thing out. It just clips in place. It's all a bit low end, frankly. I don't think it's a problem as such. It's just not very nice. And drive bay is one of those things that we just expect to work. These give the impression that if you took them on and off a good few times, eventually the little clips are going to break off. Having said that, how often did you take the drive bays out of your PC? Not realistically all that often. Nonetheless, it doesn't feel great. Noise, obviously it depends entirely on what you build into this PC. It is a huge case. It has a load of filtering, it also has a load of perforation. It is not especially quiet, but if you whack up 8 fans or a whole load of cooling, then it could be noisy. On the other hand, turn everything down the BIOS, use those inline resistors on the ring fans, it'll be quiet. It really depends on what you're doing. So it's very hard to make a judgment, but as it comes out the box, it's not whisper quiet, but then it doesn't really have any noise deadening material throughout. Anyway, overall, it's an unusual case because of its size, but the fact of the matter is that unless you're intending to use the pedestal for something, then really this case is a bit of a quirky fella. If you have a plan for that pedestal, whether it's lighting, radiators, stuff, then great. It's the sort of thing you look at, you think, I'm surprised there's not 8 more drive bays down the bottom. I'm not saying I want 8 more drive bays in the pedestal, I'm just saying it looks like there might be. If I move that tower down the bottom, keep the power supply there, well then I open up the top of the case. Well, that's all well and good, but kind of so what? Yes, I could put another 2 graphics cards in, I could put a load of cooling in, but I'm really thinking all in one rather than custom, because you have to mount some of your hardware, and this case just doesn't seem really absolutely made for that. Undeniably, you get many options with this case, and there is also no denying it is, for such a huge case, surprisingly cheap. Anyway, this is Leo Waldrop for Kit Guru, and this is the Thermaltake Core X71.